Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It is the last weekend of 2022 and what better way to mark the end of the year than to share with you all of the books that I read in 2022. I made a video very similar to this last year where I shared all of the books that I read in that year and tried to review them in one sentence each, which proved quite challenging, but I managed to do it and I wanted to do exactly the same this year. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to share my top 5 books of the year and go into a little bit more detail into each of those, so you can see everything that I read in the year, but also my favourites of the year as well. I set myself a goal of 50 and I read 47, so I didn't quite reach my goal for many reasons. I do feel like this next year I'm going to drop the number of books that I want to read a little bit and focus on the types of books I want to read, which I'll be sharing more about in another video coming soon with my reading goals and that sort of thing. So this may be a fairly long video, so go and grab yourself a comforting warm drink, get cozy, and let's get into all of the books that I read in 2022 reviewed in one sentence-ish. I have my laptop here as well with me so that I can go through onto Goodreads and go through the order of books that I read and also try and remember what I rated them. So I'm going to share a sentence review for each book, but also what rating I gave it out of 5 stars. I tend to rate books based off of my enjoyment, but also based off of whether I feel that the book did what it said it would do. So for example, I wouldn't rate a cozy mystery down because the mystery wasn't thrilling or gripping, because to me a cozy mystery is a mystery that feels cozy. It's not supposed to keep you on the edge of your seat. And a 5-star book to me is a book that I couldn't stop thinking about after I read it. So if I'm thinking about that book months later, then to me that has made a massive impact and would therefore be a 5-star book for me. So let's start with the first book that I read in 2022, which was Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I absolutely loved this book. It was the best book to start the new year on. It's quirky, witty, unusual, but kind of makes a deep commentary on some very important topics. And I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This book is fun and magical. Her writing is so lyrically beautiful, and I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This book felt like reading a Disney movie in the best possible way, but I felt like it lacked some of the depth that I was hoping for in it. So I would give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami, which is a collection of short stories all told in first person singular. Some of these stories were great, some of them were really mediocre, and overall I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. It's gripping, the plot twists are so unexpected, and the characters are so vivid and real as you read them. And I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I then read Graceling by Kristen Cashore. I felt like the plot and the characters were really unrealistic and kind of annoying, and I gave this one a 2 out of 5 stars. I then read The Maid by Nita Prose, which was fun and quirky, and I really enjoyed the characters of the story, particularly the main character. However, the mystery element to this novel was definitely a weak point to the story in my opinion. I would give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I then continued on with the Daevabad trilogy with The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty again. Often a second book in a series can feel like a filler, but this did not at all. It continued to be so plot twisty and gripping and developed the characters so well. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was my least favourite Ishiguro novel that I've read. I've read all of his novels now, but that doesn't mean it was bad by any means. I just felt like it didn't quite linger in my mind the way that Ishiguro's other books have for me. So I believe I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, I think. The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle Jensen. This book could have been amazing, but it just felt really annoying to read. I felt like the characters did not act in a realistic way. The plot was way too convenient and there were just too many plot holes for me. I think it's good if you want pure escapist romantic fantasy, but for me it was just a little bit too unbelievable. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This was a really fast-paced and enjoyable thriller mystery. I love mystery books that are set in close settings, and this is all set in one big apartment complex and told from lots of different characters. This was a page turner that I just couldn't put down, and I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I then read the first book in the Earthsea series, which was A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I thought this book was okay. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, but I did think the writing was very well done and it made me want to continue on with the series. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. I did enjoy this book, but it took me a while to get through it. I thought it would be a fast page turner, but I ended up having to kind of force myself to keep going until the last like 100 pages, 50 pages, and then I found it really enjoyable. And I think I gave this one a 3 or a 4 out of 5 stars, I can't remember, but I'm gonna go with 3 stars. Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier. It's just fun and pure escapism, and it was a really good introduction for me to Daphne du Maurier's writings, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was the penultimate novel of his that I needed to read to have read all of his novels. This is quite possibly one of my favourites as well. It has the best plot twist right at the end of the novel that I've ever read, and I keep thinking about it constantly, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I read this one as part of a book club as well, and I honestly thought this book was really good. I think the message it shared was very well done. I know there's mixed opinions on it, but for me, I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how good this book was, and I actually gave it 5 out of 5 stars, which really surprised me, but I thought it was a brilliant book. The Empire of Gold, which was the final book in the David Bad trilogy, and by far the biggest book that I read throughout the year. This was a brilliant conclusion to the trilogy, and this series just kept me gripped the whole time. Even though these books are massive, I never felt bored. I also gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. Su Lin Tan's writing was so lyrical and beautiful, but the story, I just didn't connect with the story. I didn't really know the retelling either that it was based off of, so I might have enjoyed it more if I'd known a little bit more about the original story. But I just didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really enjoy the characters. I just didn't connect with it, and I gave this one a 2 out of 5 stars. A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars when I first read it, and then I could not get it out of my head and ended up upping it to a 5 out of 5 stars. This was everything that I love in a fantasy story. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I still haven't watched the film for this book, which I think kind of depicts how I felt about it. I think I gave this one a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5 stars. One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote a really clever, difficult situation and dealt with it in a very interesting and emotional way. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars because I felt like the ending happened way too fast, and in reality the resolution of this situation would probably have taken a little bit more time and thinking than it actually did in this book. I then read Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery, which is the second book in the Anne of Green Gables series. I love this series so much. It's so heartwarming. I didn't feel like this book was as good as the first one, but I still really enjoyed it, and I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Live No Lies by John Mark Comer, which is a book about lies, obviously. I didn't actually rate this one because I still don't really know how to rate a non-fiction book. Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones, which is the sequel kind of to Howl's Moving Castle. It's a companion story and I really enjoyed this one. I think this is a perfect book to read on a warm summer's evening, and Diana Wynne Jones's storytelling is just so magical and whimsical, and I loved it. I think I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro, the last of his novels that I had to read to have read all of his books. This book is kind of like The Remains of the Day, but not quite as good. But I still really enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The Reading Life by C.S. Lewis, which is a collection of C.S. Lewis's essays or quotes or letters around reading, and I really enjoyed reading this one. It gave me a lot of interesting insights into how to read better. I don't feel like I can really rate this one because it's not a book, it's just someone collating bits together, but I really enjoyed it. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. It's eerie and mysterious and kept me on the edge of my seat. I just loved it so much. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Daisies for Innocence by Bailey Cottrell, which is one of my favourite covers of any of the books that I've read this year. This is a cozy mystery, and even though I think a cozy mystery doesn't have to be absolutely gripping and thrilling, I think it still needs to be at least a little bit believable. And the stuff that happens in this book, there's just no believability about it at all, and it really got me out of the story too much. So I gave this one a 2 out of 5 stars, I think. Hind's Feet on High Places by Hannah Hernard, and this is an illustrated edition by Jill DeHaan and Rachel McNaughton. This is a really beautiful book about the Christian faith. I enjoyed this book, and I think the artwork really helped me to kind of get through it and connect with it actually. But it did take me a while to get through. I felt like I could read a couple of chapters and then I had to stop for a bit, but I did really enjoy it. I don't really know what I would rate it, but I think it's one that I would reread, and it's a classic. So I mean, that's another thing I struggle with, is rating classics, because they're classics, they've stood the test of time. But I think I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood. This is The Great Gatsby meets Gilmore Girls in Cornwall, and it was magical. The romance is so sweet, the setting is so beautifully described, and you really feel the warmth of summer through these pages. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I then read Anne of the Island, which is the third book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and this is probably my favourite of the whole series so far. We follow Anne as she goes off to university and that kind of era of her life, and I really enjoyed reading about her character at that age. I think she grows up so much in this story, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. The Museum of Extraordinary Things by Alice Hoffman. It's definitely not what I thought it was going to be. It's quite heavy and dark. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I've heard so many amazing things about this book, and I really didn't enjoy it. It's so not believable. The characters do not speak like real people. I think the redeeming factors were that it was quite addictive to read and very fast paced. I would probably give this a 2 out of 5 stars. Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross, which is a young adult fantasy standalone. I think a standalone fantasy book is a challenging book to write because you have so much world building to do just in one story, and Rebecca Ross did that amazingly in this book. The world and the magic are so creative, and I just loved the character interactions between family and the romantic plot lines as well. It just brings everything together so well, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars as well. Shady Hollow by Janu Black. This is a cozy murder mystery set in a woodland community. So all of the characters are animals who live in a woodland, but they talk and they live like humans in that they run coffee shops, and we follow a reporter who is trying to find out what happened to the toad who was murdered. This book is so cozy, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. This one definitely kept me on the edge of my seat the most out of all of the books of hers that I've read, but I just didn't enjoy it as much as some of the other ones. It just didn't feel as unique as Rebecca or as fun as Frenchman's Creek. So I think I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot darker than I was expecting it to be, but also very readable and very gripping. I think I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. This is another one that I've tried to read multiple times and struggled to get through, but I forced myself to finish it because I didn't want to DNF any books this year. It's well written and the characters are really well depicted. I like that it touches on some really important themes. However, I just didn't really enjoy the story. I felt very disconnected from the world. I don't think the world building made that much sense to me. I think I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Although I love this story, I think I would have loved it more if I hadn't watched the film first and had such a love for that version of the story. It's pretty much the same, but just with a few changes, which I appreciated reading, but I think for me at least, this is a case of the movie is actually better than the book. But it was still brilliant, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. So this is the 4th Daphne du Maurier book that I read this year. I think she's the author I read the most books from. This is my least favourite of them all so far. I found it quite slow and hard to really get into. However, the eerie, dark atmosphere is really well done. I would probably give this one a 3 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Confessions of a Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella, which is one of my most read books, even though it's absolutely not my kind of book at all. I must have read this book about 5 or 6 times in my life, and it used to be one of my favourite series when I was a lot younger, and it felt like a warm hug rereading it now. I would give this a 5 out of 5 stars just for the nostalgia of it being a favourite book, but maybe a 4 out of 5 stars if I was reading it for the first time now. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This was also a reread of a favourite book. I've probably read this series about 10 times. I absolutely loved it. I don't really know what more I can say other than that. This is, for me at least, the ultimate children's book series that made me really fall in love with reading. And of course I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I finally read The Nutcracker by E.T.A. Hoffman. I feel like the adaptations of this story make it more magical than the original fairy tale, but I did find it really interesting to read the original and see kind of where it came from and where some of these references have come from. I don't really know how I'd rate this one because it's a fairy tale, but I really enjoyed reading this for discovering what the original story was. The City Baker's Guide to Country Living by Louise Miller. This is a perfect book for if you want a Gilmore Girls inspired story. This was heartwarming, lovely, and just so sweet. and I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I think it touched on some really beautiful and deep themes, which I really wasn't expecting going into this book. However, I did feel like the murder mystery component to this story was perhaps a little bit convoluted. It felt like it went off in so many different directions. And for me, in a cozy murder mystery, I kind of want it to be fairly simple. So I would give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read in 2022 is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, which was gifted to me by my friend. This is a cozy fantasy book about an orc who decides to change her ways, and instead of killing for a living, she wants to open up a coffee shop. And it is about the community that she draws in to this coffee shop and all the different people who are trying to change their lives and move on into a new life. I really enjoyed the coziness of it. I really enjoyed the community that is drawn in. I think this book is described as sort of slice of life. So you're just getting a day-to-day normal life. For me, at times I felt a little bit slow, but I did overall really enjoy it, and I would give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I missed a book. I also read the second book in this series, which is The Tombs of Atuan. I read this one after Anne of the Island, so in like October time, and I enjoyed this one more than A Wizard of Earthsea. It was kind of dark and weird and mysterious and strange, but in a good way, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, we've made it through all 47 books. Thank you for sticking around if you're still with me. I'm now going to share my top 5 books from those 47 that I've read this year. This isn't in any particular order, these are just all books that I absolutely loved. So I did a video around halfway through the year with my top 5 books of the year at that halfway point, and to be honest, 4 out of the 5 are still in my top 5. So clearly I had a very good first half of the year and not so great of a second half of the year for reading. Only one book from the last half of the year made it into my top 5. So first of all, we have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. We follow a man named Richard Mayhew, who is kind of an ordinary sort of guy. He works a very ordinary office job, and life is just fairly ordinary for him until he meets a girl who is bleeding on the streets, and he decides to help her. However, this ends up linking him into a whole other world called the London Below, which is a version of London that exists below the normal London. He ends up getting intertwined in this whole other world, and everything there is very topsy-turvy. So rats are like kings and men are like rats. The London Below is where everything that is lost or forgotten or kind of discarded in the real world ends up. So tube stations that have been closed down in London end up being opened in the London Below, and that sort of thing. And I love fantasy books that touch on a very real issue and use the fantasy world to exasperate and highlight the issue. By making everything else about the world different but keeping that issue the same, it kind of highlights it and puts a magnifying glass on it. But also the world is just very enjoyable and fun to read at the same time. So I absolutely love this one, and it definitely makes me want to read more of Neil Gaiman's books in the future. Also, my favourite books of the year, we have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This is in my favourites purely for how much I enjoyed this book. It was honestly the perfect blend of fantasy for me. The way that it deals with themes like faith and marriage and hurt and family, and it just touches on so many themes, but it interweaves them in a way where it feels very natural and also gives you the kind of fun of a fantasy story with a unique world and magic. This story follows a bard who is working at a university as a music teacher or a music professor, and the story begins as he receives a letter from the chief of his clan, I believe, asking him to return home with only his harp because his clan need him. And so he returns home to this island, which people steer well clear of this island because I believe there are these spirits that kind of surround the island, and it makes people not want to travel across the water to it. I fully recommend this if you want a fun but deep adult fantasy series. We then, of course, have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Oh, actually, I don't think this was in my top 5 from last year. I think it was Frenchman's Creek, but I now would say it's Rebecca instead. So in this book, we follow a young, unnamed woman who marries a slightly older man on this trip. He brings her home to his house in Cornwall called Manderley, and this man's wife recently died, called Rebecca, and so our main character is trying to fit into this household and fill the kind of shoes of Rebecca. However, Rebecca seems to haunt every part of this house, and she just can't get rid of this woman from the house. It's really eerie and slightly creepy and mysterious. Even though towards the end, I feel like the ending you can kind of guess, to me, the interesting part was how that ending then unfolded and what happened right at the very end. Since moving to Cornwall a couple of years ago, I've really wanted to read Daphne du Maurier's books, and I feel like this year, I mean, I read 4, but this year I've had a really good introduction to them, and I would say she's becoming one of my favourite authors. So I really enjoyed this book and would fully recommend it if you want to get into her books and haven't read any before. I think this is probably the best one to start with. We then have A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was my favourite of his books that I read this year and one of my top 3 of his books ever. In short, this story follows a woman called Etsuko, and her daughter has recently committed suicide, and she's reflecting on her past and kind of the events leading up to her moving from Japan to England, where she now lives, and particularly a friendship she had with a woman in Japan. This is one of those books where you're reading it and thinking, where on earth is this story going? It kind of meanders around and tangents off quite a lot, to the point where you're not really sure where the plot's going. It does something at the end of the book though that makes that whole story really worth it and makes so much more sense. This is one that I think about quite a lot and definitely want to reread in the near future. Now that I know how it ends, I think it would be really interesting to read it from the beginning and see if I can pick up the hints as I go along. And then my final favourite of the year is Anne of the Island by L.M. Montgomery, the 3rd book in the Anne of Green Gables series. If you haven't read this series at all, we follow Anne, who is an orphan, and she is adopted by a brother and sister to work on their farm. They actually thought they were adopting a boy and are quite disgruntled when they get a girl. They're pretty convinced that they're going to give her back and trade her in for a boy, but they end up falling in love with her and she becomes like a daughter to them. And we follow Anne throughout her life. In the 1st book, she's a young child. In the 2nd book, she's maybe 16. And then in this book, she's at university, so 18 to 20s. And I really just loved reading this era of her life. Even though this book was written like 100 years ago, probably over 100 years ago, the themes that it touches on are so relevant to that period of life now. The way that you move from home and have to change your relationship with your family, the way that you have friends at home, but then when you move, your friendship with them changes and you have to readjust it. When your friends fall in love and you're single, or when you fall in love and your friends are single. It touches on so many themes and depicts a part of all of us, I think, a childlikeness that is in all of us. And I'm very excited to carry on reading that series this coming year. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments what your favourite books of 2022 were. I would love to know, to get some recommendations for the coming year as well. I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you very soon in the next video.